Over the last 30 years of NBA history, the league has been dominated by one conference, being the Western Conference. The last time the Eastern Conference was genuinely better than the West was the 1980s. More than 30 years ago, the East was superior, and then it seemed like all the talent went to the West when Michael Jordan started dominating. Yes, Jordan made and won the finals 6 times. He made it 6 times partially because he had the best team in the league, but he also made it partially because the East was just not very good, and it really never recovered from Michael Jordan and his dominance. In the 2000s, the Lakers and the Spurs dominated the West and kept teams like the Mavericks and the Suns from even making the finals more than once or twice. Alright, there were some great teams in the 2000s in the West who never made the finals. Another example would be the Melo Nuggets, alright? Meanwhile, the East, the Pistons were really good, don't get me wrong, a great team, but not like that good. The Magic had really like 1 or 2 years of being legit contenders. The Celtics had 1 year before injuries stopped them. And LeBron, I'm sorry, that's unfair to the Celtics. The Celtics had several years, but they got injured after the first one, I should say. And LeBron and the Cavs, that was literally just LeBron James carrying this team of scrubs. Alright, D-Wade, with his title in 2006, was so impressive because they came out of freaking nowhere and beat the Mavericks from the West, who were heavily favorited because they made it out of the West instead of the weak-ass East. Then in the 2010s, it's literally just LeBron James ruling the East. We had I'm trying to think who would be the best team of the 2010s. I would have to say the Toronto Raptors in 2019, when fully healthy, were probably the best non-LeBron team in the East. I mean, you had the Celtics in a few different iterations that were decent, but they were never, 2008 levels. The Sixers had a few good years at the very end, same with the Bucks. The Heat were good with LeBron there, and the Cavs were great with LeBron there. The only other real competition was the Bulls with Derrick Rose before he got injured, and the Pacers with Paul George were amazing for 2 seasons. The Eastern Conference, what I'm trying to say is, has been kind of poopy. There have just been far more stars in the West than in the East over the last 3 decades, but it looks like that might finally be changing, and the Eastern Conference may at long last be back on top. So after that very long intro, that is what I want to look at today, and the rest of this video shouldn't be as crazy long, but I just want to look at the 2 conferences and see which one is better right now. If you look at the NBA, the top 3 teams in the league are currently in the West. However, the worst team in the league, the Minnesota Timberwolves, are also in the West. Meanwhile, in the East, the Sixers are at the top, but they would only be the 4th seed in the West. Likewise, the Nets would only be the 5th seed. Meanwhile, even though the East does not have the worst team in the NBA, the next 3 worst teams after the Timberwolves are all in the East. So far, things are not looking good for the Eastern Conference. It gets even worse when you look at the current playoff race. In the East, there are only 5 teams above 500 in the East, the top 5 seeds. In the West, there are currently 8 teams above 500, and then 1 team, the 9th seed, is at 500. Meanwhile, the East team who's at 500 is the 6th seeded Celtics. Now, we know the Celtics are better than that, but that's still kind of sus, alright? It's still kinda sus. And overall, the bottom of the East is also worse than the bottom of the West. So does this mean that, I did this whole video for nothing? There's really no competition, the West is clearly better still? Well, not really. You see, if you look at the overall talent of the 2 sides, let's look, for example, at the contenders. If you look at the 2 conferences, I would say there are 7 teams total, 4 in the East and 3 in the West, who you can make a legitimate argument for being contenders this season. And you know what, let's say 3 and 3. Let's say it's even, because I think it's unfair. I was trying to go against my bias here against the Celtics and give them the benefit of the doubt, but honestly, as long as they have Kemba Walker playing like this and they don't have a good big man, I can't give it to them. Okay, they're not really contenders. There are 3 teams in the East and 3 teams in the West you can call contenders. The Jazz and the 2 LA teams in the West, and the Sixers, Nets, and Bucks in the East. Now, I don't personally believe in the Nets, but everyone else does, and they're kicking ass right now, so it would be very unfair to leave them out of here. Same thing with the Jazz. I'm a little iffy on how good they can eventually be, but they're kicking too much ass to not call them contenders right this second. So it looks like the top contention of the East and the West is even, right? Well, not really, because the team with the best record is still in the West, and the team who is pretty clearly the title favorite as of right now is still in the West, in the Los Angeles Lakers. So once again, the West still wins. But the important thing to note here is that it's just not as clear as it once was. The finals really are wide open this year. Okay, who could win the title? The Lakers are the clear favorites, but they are in no way the favorites to the level that, like, the Warriors were for the last half a decade. Alright? Not in the way that the Spurs or the Lakers were for most of the 2000s. The East really has caught up, and it's the same thing if you look at star power. Look at the MVP race right now. Joel Embiid is at the top of the MVP race. Giannis has won the last 2 MVPs. James Harden and Kevin Durant are both together on the Nets, both previous MVPs who are still playing at a superstar level. Even teams like the Celtics have up-and-coming players like Jason Tatum and Brown. The Heat have not been doing well, but they are a very good team who still has time to make the playoffs. The Hawks have a bunch of young talent, and they're going to be good in a few years from now. Alright? I swear to God, the Hawks are going to get together one of these days. Even the Pacers have a very good group of young players, even if they don't quite have the same superstar ceiling as some other people. Now, obviously, the West has no shortage of talent right now whatsoever, alright? The Jazz have several players who deserve to be all-stars, namely Donovan Mitchell, Gobert, and Mike Conley. The Lakers have 2 superstars, the Clippers have 2 superstars. You get teams like the Suns with Devin Booker and Chris Paul, who should both be all-stars. The Blazers with Damian Lillard. The Spurs have been weirdly good this year. Nuggets have Nikola Jokic, who's a freaking beast and also an MVP candidate. Steph Curry on the Warriors. Then they got all these up-and-coming guys. Luka is already a superstar, but he's been underperforming this season, not even close to his prime. De'Aaron Fox, Zion Williamson. There are just so many. Man, there's a lot of talented players in the league, but there's so many of them, and for the longest time, they were mostly in the West. You look at the last several decades, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen in the East, Shaq for a few years, and then you got like Dwayne Wade and LeBron James in the East are like the best players there for a while. T-Mac for a little bit. Trying to think the last few years. Last few years there's been like Giannis and Embiid over here. But for the most part, the West has just been flooded with superstar talent. Dirk, Garnett, Tim Duncan, Kobe, Shaq for the most part. I'm talking guys who were there for most of their career. You know what I'm saying? All the Warriors players like KD, Steph, and Clay. Alright? Kawhi Leonard was in the West for a while, and he's back in the West now. People have been in the West more than they have been in the East until now. The balance is finally starting to even out, and I actually don't think this conference dominance is going to continue anymore. And it's even better than just the East finally taking over, even though, I would kind of prefer that as someone whose team's in the Eastern Conference. It's not even that. It's more that I think the NBA is really approaching a state of good parity. There is so much talent in the league right now, it's really getting harder, in my opinion, for there to be just these super teams or super conferences that dominate one side or the other. There are so many stars right now. Look at the All-Star voting. Okay, you can only have, I believe, 24 or 26 players who are All-Stars. It's impossible to choose. Sorry, I just choked on some air that I went to breathe in because I don't know to be a human. But it's impossible to vote. Like, trying to make an all-star list right now, if any of you done it, I know I've done it. It was a pain in the butt because there are tons of players right now who deserve to be all-stars, and they just can't be because there's not enough spaces. I cannot think of another time in NBA history where there were this many star-level players in the league. I really can't. The only time that I think would compare would be like the mid to late 2000s, and even then, I really don't think it holds up to what the league has right now. It's insanity. The MVP race is ridiculous. There are like 6 or 7 legitimate MVP candidates right now. In my opinion, there are more superstars than there have ever been. The only other time that it would be comparable would be maybe the early 90s or the mid 90s or the 2000s. It's crazy how talented the league is right now, and this may change in a few years if the NBA does end up expanding 2 more teams to Seattle and somewhere else like Vegas, and the league parity, spreads out a little bit more and it changes things again. But as of right now, a big reason why I believe this will be the best decade in NBA history, the star talent, and the fact that it results in parity. I don't think there's going to be as many super teams anymore because the Warriors was such a freaking weird case, and even when you get other ones like the Nets, it's just really hard to build a perfect team around that group. The Boston Celtics partially were so damn good in the East because everyone else in the East sucked at the time. Now obviously that's an all-time great team nevertheless, but still, throwing 3 stars together on the same team doesn't mean as much when all the good teams have superstar duos because there's so much talent in the NBA. I love it. So long story short, I think that parity is finally coming back to conferences in the NBA in a way that it really never has been since maybe like the 60s or the 70s. Certainly not since the 80s when the Lakers dominated the West and everyone else in the West sucked butt, and the East was clearly better at that point. Just incredible time in the NBA. I am very, very excited to watch this decade, and I hope the rest of you, like me, are very happy to be a fan right now. We are about to experience possibly the greatest portion of NBA history, and I cannot wait. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you believe the greatest decade in NBA history was, and check out my series on the greatest decades if you haven't already. Thank you again for watching. Have a great rest of your day.